So I have done a thing because I'm tired of making transition videos that just say, hey, I got a little furrier and maybe a little bit more muscular. So I'm going to start making some videos about other trans topics, and the topic for today is stealth. Being stealth is what trans people do when having transitioned in whatever way someone's going to transition and reached a point where they feel confident that they can read as the gender they want to read as most of the time. Someone lives full-time in that gender and doesn't acknowledge their trans identity or history, depending on how they kind of conceptualize that. Stealth is kind of a complicated thing for me. I had very little sympathy for it pre-testosterone. It seemed to me like a cop-out and like a betrayal and kind of cowardly, and as someone who could not read as male most of the time, and or as any kind of normatively gendered person, and as someone who was not just genderqueer identified, but visibly genderqueer, I mean who walked in the world and couldn't be read or put in a box, I got very frustrated by hearing from people whose biggest worry was that they couldn't manage to pass and be stealth. Because I just remember thinking, what do I pass as? Like, when do I get to be stealth? And it is something that as I've become more able to choose that, I've developed a little bit more empathy for the other side of things. It's very easy for me to just read as a cis guy. Like, it's super easy. I'm fairly tall as trans men go. I'm about 5'8". I'm not super well built, and I do experience some of the complexities of being a fairly small, young-looking guy. But on the whole, I just look like a guy. I don't get people questioning my gender a whole lot. My sexuality, yes, but not my gender or my gendered history. So, really, it would be very easy for me at this point to move somewhere new and just be a man and not talk about being trans. Now, easy logistically, not easy personally or emotionally, because as y'all may have gauged by now, I really like talking about being trans. It would really suck if I couldn't do that anymore. But I am in a position at work where I don't, and I don't feel like I can. My old HR manager knew, but she's left, so I don't know if the new one knows. One of my store managers knows. Maybe they all do, I don't know, but I only know that one of them does. I think my department head knows. Definitely my department second used to, but she got fired. So at this point, there are only a handful of people where I work who have any idea that I'm trans. And, no, that's not true. One of my coworkers knows I'm trans because he came to my thesis exhibition. To my knowledge, none of my other coworkers know. And it's not something really that I've intentionally cultivated. In fact, for a long time I really looked for opportunities to kind of bring it up, but it just never happened. My work environment's not one where people talk about personal things. I mean, not even like having spouses, really. So that's part of it. But part of it is that it's safe. Part of it is that it's really tough to find work right now, and I have a work environment that, although it sucks in some ways, is not actively hostile toward my person. And so I do struggle some, still, with the sense that I'm selling out and kind of being cowardly and could be working harder for change than I am, but I also think, there's gotta be some space for survival. There's gotta be some space for self-care. There's gotta be some awareness of the fact that sometimes you just need a freaking break from always being the trans guy in the room. And unfortunately, lots of folks never get a break from being the trans person in the room. And I say unfortunately, not because I think it's unfortunate to always be visible as trans, but because I think it's unfortunate to always have to carry the burdens that come with that. because there's a lot of social weight that comes with being trans. There are a lot of expectations around invasive questions that you're expected to answer, and examples that you're supposed to serve as, and populations that you're supposed to represent. And I think everybody should be entitled to take a break from that. I think everyone should be entitled to take a permanent break from that. So, I guess where I stand on stealth now is that I think it's really non-ideal. I think it's really crap that the only way to get out from under all of the weight that comes with being trans is to be stealth. And not that I think that being stealth is intrinsically bad, right? Stripping aside all of the privilege-oppression dynamics, if we lived in a perfect world where trans people were totally accepted, I think probably some people would still be stealth. Maybe more people would be stealth, because you wouldn't necessarily need to prove anything about it, right? Like, there wouldn't necessarily be as much reason for talking about it. It would be like having an appendectomy, for some people. For me, probably not so much. I think I would talk about trans no matter what. I think it's interesting and cool, and I dig it. But I do think that people would probably still choose to be stealth, because for some folks, this is so much just about embodiment, right? Like, I'm a man trapped in a woman's body, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body. That really rings true for some folks. Although for me, it's a little bit oversimple. So I think that stealth would probably make sense even in the absence of oppression for some people. I think it's really crap that being stealth gets all wrapped up in this big privilege oppression ball, and there's really no way to strip it, to separate it from that. There's no way to split those things apart and engage them individually. And so we end up in this place where trans folks are blaming other trans folks for doing what we have to in order to survive, whether that's physically or emotionally or some combination of the two. And frankly, the issue is not trans folks. The issue is transphobic society. And so I do think there's an extent to which those of us who can have got to say, you know what, I'm trans, because that's how change happens. I mean, it just is. And there's no getting around the fact that things are not going to change for trans people if none of us stand up and say, hey, I'm trans and things need to change for trans people. There's also no getting around the fact that some of the time for some of us, and all of the time for some of us, we've got to be stealth in order to survive. And if we don't survive, we can't do activism. If we don't survive, we can't push outside our comfort zones. If we don't have anywhere to retreat to, whether that means being stealth or whether that means finding safe spaces in other ways, we can't do the activist stuff. So, I don't know if that gives anybody any new ideas about stealth or not, or if I've just talked myself in a big circle. But those are kind of my thoughts on it, such as they are.